Hey guys, this is Dave with Gazaudio. I apologize for the setup here, but I couldn't fit all of this on my little review table I normally use. So today we're going to be deviating slightly away from portable audio and do Gizaudio's first ever speaker review, which is exciting because although portable audio is definitely the primary focus of Gazaudio, I think there are probably a lot of you that have a desktop setup as well, or even just might be looking to start building a desktop setup. So hopefully some of you will find this useful. So this is the Fiio SP3 active desktop speaker system. Comes in at $300, and while it's designed primarily as a near-field speaker, it also works quite well as just a general tabletop style speaker in, say, your den or living space. And I did test it in both scenarios and found it to be quite versatile in that regard. But before we jump in, let's quickly go over the accessories that are included with the SP3 speaker system. So of course we have the speakers themselves. They also include two sets of rubber stands. One has a 7-degree angle and the other is flat. They also include some really nice cables, a stereo RCA to 3.5 cable, an 8-pin cable that attaches to both speakers that essentially sends power and an audio signal from the right speaker to the left speaker, and then finally a power cord. And again, the cables they supply are very nice and are made of fairly high quality materials. Now, as for specifications and design, the SP3 is an active speaker, so it has a built-in amplifier which sends 30 watts to each 3.5-inch driver and then 10 watts to each tweeter. It implements a two-way crossover, which of course the crossover divides the high and the low frequencies and sends them to the appropriate drivers. And on the front, we've got the two drivers. On the top, we have a 1-inch silk dome tweeter handling the highs, and then a 3.5-inch carbon fiber driver that handles the mids and the bass. On the back of the right speaker, on the top, you have a bass port, then you've got two knobs. One is the volume knob, then the other is a bass adjustment knob. Directly below that, we have an input button, RGB button, two RCA inputs, a left and a right, then a 3.5 line in. Then you also have a little toggle here, which allows you to assign which channel you want to send to each speaker. So if this speaker is on the right, obviously you'll flick it over to the right. Then you have a power button, a power input, then an 8-pin output that sends the power and the signal to the other speaker. And then quickly going back to the RGB button, this actually does have 24 different colors and also different pulsating light schemes to choose from. Now, the housing itself is actually made from die-cast metal, and it definitely feels like it because these things are built like little tanks, and they definitely have some weight to them. And if you look at the grooves around the tweeter, apparently those are actually specifically shaped and designed to allow the high frequencies coming from the tweeter to diffuse a little more effectively. And what that does, it aids apparently in giving the listener a larger perceived soundstage. And as I mentioned before, you have the 3.5-inch driver that's made of carbon fiber. So it is rigid, but it's still lightweight. And this little thing actually is pretty impressive for its size. But of course, I'll make sure and add a link to the product page in the description because it does go into more depth about the tech and the material choices that went into the design and the build of the SP3. Okay, let's talk about the sound of the SP3. So as I mentioned before, this system is primarily designed as a desktop solution and sounds best in a near-field scenario, and that's how I did most of my listening. But I also set these up in my main living space, which has a fairly open type of layout, and I already have my main audio system in one area, but I also wanted to set these up in a spot where I could project the sound towards my kitchen and fireplace. Now I'll talk about that, but first let's go ahead and talk about how well they work worked as a desktop system, which they were designed for. So I tried a couple of different setups with my desktop configuration. The first was using the Fiio M15S as a source, connected via USB to my topping E70. And the second, using my PC as a source, again, connected via USB also to my topping E70 DAC, and then using the RCA out to the 3.5 input on the back of the right SP3. And I also tried the RCA inputs as well. And to be honest, I really didn't notice a difference in the sound between the RCA inputs and the 3.5 input. So as far as the sound of the SP3s in a desktop scenario, these are going to be competing with speakers more along the lines of the Klipsch R51 PM, the Edifier 2000 dB, the Presonus Eris E3.5, the Audio Engine A2 Plus, etc. Now, I will say this again, the build quality and accessories that you get with the SP3s are excellent at this price. However, when I first saw the SP3's specs, one of my first thoughts before I knew the price was I wish they would have included a digital input or Bluetooth capabilities like some of the competition. But then when I finally got my hands on these, and then I had learned that they're priced at $299, that started to make a little more sense to me, because the more I listened to them, the more I started to think to myself, these may not have some of the features the competition has, but the sound quality coming from these little beasts just might make that $299 price justifiable. So let's go ahead and talk about that. So in my initial testing, I was trying to get an idea of the SP3's sound signature. And obviously you can make adjustments to the sound with the bass tone control on the back. So with the bass control all the way down, the overall signature is what I would consider to be just a little more mid and treble forward. And at reasonable volumes, the highs do still maintain an overall pretty smooth presentation. But what was impressive was that even at higher volumes, the SP3 did an excellent job at retaining its signature, and it did a really good job at controlling those higher frequencies and those mid frequencies as well. So I was able to listen at pretty high volumes, again, high volumes using them in a near field setup. So I was only probably about 2 to 3 feet away, but at higher volumes, the highs never really got to the point of becoming harsh or piercing. And again, they retained a fairly smooth presentation and were generally well controlled. So then as I started to turn the bass levels up using the bass knob on the back, the signature started to sound a little less mid and treble forward and a little more balanced overall. And I ended up settling with the bass knob at about the halfway point, because that was kind of the sweet spot for me, and it just sounded the most balanced at that level. And it didn't muddy the sound up or affect the musical details too much. Now, of course, this is a 3.5-inch driver handling the bass frequencies, and while the specs say these go down to 65 Hertz, and it does sound like they go pretty low, but when I turn the bass knob up, it sounds like it's more of a mid bass and a low mid type of bass boost, which is to be expected with a speaker this size. But I did find myself having to be careful not to turn the bass knob up all the way when listening to tracks with a little more bass presence at higher volumes, because while these drivers can handle pretty incredible amounts of excursion and push some serious air, they do have their limitations. Now, when it comes to detail, imaging, and separation, obviously these will perform better in a near field arrangement than if you have these set up in a larger, more open space and are listening from maybe a good distance. But in a near field arrangement, the detail retrieval of the SP3 is very good for this price range, as is the instrument, imaging, and separation. And I tried them both facing towed in and straightforward, and I did notice that with them towed in, the image tightened up just a little bit more. And even with them towed in just slightly, they were able to project a decently wide soundstage and again, maintain a more focused phantom center and image. Now, just quickly, I also set the SP3s up in my main living space, which has a fairly open type of layout. And I already have my main audio system, but I wanted some speakers facing towards the kitchen and the fireplace. So I set the SP3s up on a console in that area of the living space, and then used my M15S in Rune mode, which worked out great. Now, of course, my goal in this type of setup was not so much focused on the technical side of the SP3's capabilities as much as it was just to see how well it would do at projecting and dispersing the sound in a larger area. And I was actually pleasantly surprised at how well it did at filling that space. And again, my goal wasn't to listen at super high volumes, but I was able to achieve way more volume than I or my wife needed while just cooking or relaxing in that part of our living space. And another thing, these aren't ugly, so they actually looked pretty cool in that space as well. Now, of course, these did end up back on my desk in my office. And although I typically do most of my editing or listening using IEMs or headphones, I do on occasion use these as well, and they work really great for both. So here's the thing, if you're looking for a desktop speaker solution, or even just a little speaker setup for a smaller living space, then I would definitely recommend these because they work well in both scenarios. And Fiio, of course, they also have the R7 as well, which is kind of like a little tabletop DAP thing. And you've seen it probably paired with the SP3s if you've seen pictures of this in some of their promotional material. But it looks kind of interesting, and combined with these, it could actually make a pretty cool little mini hi-fi system. So overall, I think this is a really good offering by Fiio, and again, it does get my recommendation. So that concludes my review of the Fiio SP3s. If you're new to the Gazaudio channel and you like our videos, please take a minute and hit that subscribe button. And if you want to go a step further with your support, we also now have a Patreon. I'll make sure and leave a link in the description. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this video. Please like this video. Please share this video. I hope you guys have an awesome day.